Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. We started our journey down on Wall Street, but that's not really the heart of darkness in this financial Armageddon, this apocalypse. It's actually in Midtown Manhattan, which you see behind me. So we've come upriver looking for Colonel Kurtz, who we will attempt to exterminate with extreme prejudice. Stacy Herbert, tell us more.
Max, I assume that you mean Colonel Kurtz is Jamie Dimon, who works at JPMorgan. He's the CEO of JPMorgan, which you might see behind the Chrysler building right there on the horizon. JPMorgan is below that, and I understand you're going to go scouting them later. You're going to go deep into the heart of darkness. But the question is, this is America's curse. Not really a question, but a statement in that headline. It's from Zero Hedge. And they look at the participation rate happening around the Western world, but in particular America, where people are no longer voting. People aren't showing up to vote. So in 2012, for example, in the presidential elections, less than 50% of the people eligible to vote voted. So they show a chart. It's called the bull market and apathy. Change in voting rates since 1980, source is OECD, and Korea has the worst. It's a decline of about 33% since 1980, and the U.S. is next, a drop of nearly 30% in voter participation. So Zero Hedge is asking, is this because of the Department of Justice? Nobody's being, we always get Larry Summers, we always get Robert Rubin. I was going to say Rick Rubin, actually.
Def Jam Records, keeping it real. LL Cool J? No. Well, look, you don't need the voters. You don't need the population. You don't need people working. You don't need their tax receipts, because the top 5,000 princes in America have access to Jamie Dimon, Colonel Dimon's fountain of free money, along with the Federal Reserve Bank. They just print more quantitative easing. It goes into these princelings in America. Therefore, like Saudi Arabia, which has a similar situation, they have a fountain of oil. They don't need the people, so they have abject poverty and some 5,000 princes. In America, similarly, you've got the aristocracy that has been created now with the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing, and they just print money as they need it. It boosts their asset prices. It boosts their real estate prices. They don't need the people to work to create the savings, to create the capital. They don't need the taxes. So the people are being essentially exterminated. That's the problem with Colonel Kurtz Dimon, is that he's gone rogue. He's become the leader of a cult. He's taken his military operations, mimicked Saudi Arabia. It's no coincidence that Saudi Arabia is now provoking war in Syria to get their gas pipeline to Europe. Just like it's no coincidence that Saudi Arabia and the petrodollar in America and the Federal Reserve Bank are colluding to exterminate the American population. The American people are not just getting poorer, they are at threat of being exterminated by Colonel Dimon.
Well, in a way, that's already happened. You can see that all along this river here, the East River in Manhattan, where there are abandoned factories, the Domino's sugar factory, the abandoned factories everywhere here, because we're not producing anything here. But in terms of this America's curse, that we're not participating in the democracy that we're spreading around the world, Zero Hedge points out that the scary part of this is that there's now no checks and balances. The only thing we have to hope for is not change, the hope and change of an Obama-like character, but collapse, because then we could all start again.
Well, the American system was brilliantly conceived as a system of checks and balances. You had various branches of government. You had a press, the fourth column, the fourth estate, as the ultimate checks and balance. You know, journalism is the only profession mentioned in the Constitution. But now you have journalism being eradicated thanks to the NSA and the spying scandal. They don't want any journalism at all. They don't want any objective analysis of what's going on in America at all. If you provide objective analysis, they will kill you, as we saw with Michael Hastings. Just like the state murdered Aaron Swartz, the state murdered Michael Hastings. They don't want any kind of objective reporting whatsoever on their financial jihad to exterminate the American people. That's the risk, is that you get exterminated.
So you mentioned the fact that because of the dollar system as a world reserve currency, the 5,000 princes of America do not need the working class to create wealth. They don't need to manufacture, because they could just print dollars and make the Chinese work and send it over to them for free, essentially. Just like Saudi Arabia can print oil, essentially, by putting in a straw, and out comes the oil. Well, here we're going to turn to this next headline about manufacturing and the collapse of manufacturing and why that's happened in America. Extra cost to make Google phone in U.S., $4. Google made a big splash when it announced the Moto X, the new flagship phone of the company's Motorola division, will be manufactured in Texas. An analysis of the smartphone's internal components by IHS iSupply revealed that the Moto X costs between $3.50 and $4 more per phone to make than the Apple iPhone 5 or the Samsung Galaxy S4, both of which are assembled in China. This report looks at this fact. It's only $4 more to make the Google phone here. So why doesn't Apple do it, for example? Why don't we restore manufacturing and wealth creation to America? All those millions of people unemployed. Well, it looks at the fact that Apple sells 138 million iPhones. If you multiply that by 4, you get about $550 million more that it would cost the company in profits. Of course, they say they're not going to do it.
Well, the reasoning makes no sense to me. They're saying that because they're so profitable, they couldn't do it in America. They're saying Americans don't deserve the profits. The few princelings that run Apple deserve the profits, not the Americans who are consuming the products or supporting the infrastructure that supports Apple, creating the infrastructure with their taxes that support Apple. They don't deserve anything. They deserve to be sent to prison. They deserve to be murdered by the state. They deserve to be eradicated because they're in the way. That's what they deserve. And the fact that Apple can make a statement like that, or Google, or any of these high-tech companies, is as absolutely devastating to the American people, I would think, as any foreign tyrant saying that they want to drop a bomb on America. It's the same. There's an equivalency there. If Tim Cook, the head of Apple, said, "I want to bomb New York City," that's Tim Cook of Apple, "I want to blow up New York City with a 10 megaton atomic bomb," people would say, "That's bad, Tim Cook." But when you say, "I want to eviscerate the entire working population of America by not sharing with them the profits that we're stealing," people say, "Oh, Carl Icahn gives them $1 billion. Carl Icahn, by the way, is a financial terrorist. He has been for decades. That man should be in Guantanamo being unmercifully beaten, in my opinion.
Well, it does look along here, the East River, if you look at all the abandoned factories, all the abandoned warehouses, it does look like there has been a bomb dropped on it. It's to do with tax policy, which encourages big corporations to send things overseas. And it has to do same part of the problem of the corporation sending overseas is the 5,000 princelings here. They don't need the worker here to create wealth. But the other thing the article points out is that the real stumbling block is speed and education. So unlike U.S. plants, Foxconn and other Chinese manufacturing operations house employees in dormitories and can send hundreds of thousands of workers to the assembly lines at a moment's notice. Workers are subjected to what most Americans would consider unbearably long hours and tough working conditions.
Well, speed in this case is the speed that Apple is shredding the Constitution. That's the speed issue here. The speed at which they're eradicating the middle class. The speed at which they're destroying everything that's left in America. That's the speed issue. They've hired communists to come in there and help them destroy America. And that's unconscionable. It's unforgivable.
Also, unbearable working conditions. We were just driving through North Carolina while we were here, and the sides of the highways are all pristine. Why? Prison labor.
Right, because prison labor is the biggest growing work population in America. They're working for $1 or $2 a day, and everyone's going to be back on the chain gang. As I've said on this show many times, get to know this song, Jump Down, Turn Around, Pick a Bale of Cotton, from the old plantation days, slaving days, because that's where everyone in America's going. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton, because y'all be working slaves now. Ha ha, thanks Tim Cook, you frickin' tyrant.
Well, the other matter, of course, is education. When the princelings, the 5,000 princelings, don't need the population, they don't need to take care of them in any way. People don't need to be educated. China also has far more skilled engineers than the United States. Apple has said it requires 30,000 industrial engineers to support its on-site factory workers, numbers that simply don't exist in America.
Right, because they engineered, like eugenicists, engineering the perfect Aryan race of consumers in America who will just consume and not ask questions and not demand civil rights or constitutional rights. Where Hitler failed, Tim Cook has succeeded. He's created a master race of consumers who don't question his authority, who just give him money and he doesn't have to pay taxes. Sieg Heil, Tim Cook! You're a credit to the Nazis.
As the NSA, their documents refer to consumers and other adversaries. So these are the sort of people they're talking about. But, you know, finally, what is America's curse? Why do people not care about the democracy here that they seem so passionate about exporting abroad? Well, behind us, as we started at the top of the show, is Colonel Kurtz, Jamie Dimon, JPMorgan, exclusive JPMorgan subject of obstruction probe in energy case. U.S. authorities are conducting a criminal investigation into whether several employees of JPMorgan Chase & Company tried to impede a regulatory investigation into alleged manipulation of power markets. So, as you know, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission fined JPMorgan $410 million in July. Elizabeth Warren, the senator, asked, why are you not investigating them for criminal behavior, obstruction of justice? And lo and behold, the FBI and the U.S. Attorneys here in Manhattan are investigating, apparently, 3 Houston traders working for JPMorgan and perhaps Blythe Masters. It's hard to know at this point, but it looks like there might be a criminal investigation.
Right, and of course these Houston traders are cast-offs, or close to the cast-offs, from the Enron scandal. So the Enron scandal was a huge scandal in America, where a huge accounting scandal. Nobody really was penalized much. Jeff Skilling, who was the CEO, is actually coming out of jail early for good behavior because they need him to help float some more junk American bonds to stupid communists in China and the rest of the world. He's a good bond salesman. They should put Mike Milken in charge of the Treasury. Then I would know that they've got a brain in their head because they realize he's the master arch criminal, the superhero bond crookery. Put Mike Milken in charge of the Federal Reserve Bank or the Treasury Secretary. Get real, Obama. You know, this is a war going on, and you're getting your handed to you by Asia and Eurasia because you're playing checkers, they're playing chess. Get Mike Milken involved, you frickin' jerk.
Well, okay, you bring up several points there because, first of all, Enron did the same thing. They spent decades in jail. One of them escaped to Paraguay, pretending he had a heart attack. But JP Morgan's only being investigated for obstruction of justice, not for the rigging of energy markets. But the other thing is that regarding the bond markets, is JP Morgan has just abandoned the students that we talked about. JP Morgan's getting out of that market, but they're also shorting the dollar by going long gold.
Right. They're getting out of student loans after racking up $1 trillion in debt that won't be paid by these students because they won't be able to get the jobs to pay the debt. So they've abandoned another generation to eradicate another generation of Americans, to exterminate them in the incinerator of their debt creation. And of course, if you put any of these JP Morgan guys in jail, because it's a privately traded jail, they'll simply do a leveraged buyout of the jail using taxpayer money and set themselves free. That's the problem when you have psychopaths running the jailing system and Wall Street. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. Good luck up in JP Morgan land.
Exterminate with extreme prejudice. Looking forward to it, Jamie. Stay tuned. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. We made it all the way upriver with this banking apocalypse now, searching for Colonel Kurtz of banking, Jamie Dimon. I'm here with Turd Ferguson of tfmetalsreport.com, also of zerohedge.com. Turd, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max. Great to see you.
All right, Turd, has JP Morgan cornered the Comex gold market?
It would certainly appear to be that way, Max, and if they have, it's a rather big deal, I would say.
Let's talk about it.
The data, and the reason I would say that, comes from, well, it's not really my idea. There's a silver analyst by the name of Ted Butler. You might know who he is. He's been studying all of the CFTC-generated data for years. So he knows the ins and outs. He looks at all the different reports that come out once a week, once a month, and he noticed this a couple of months ago. I was able to do some of my own research, and I think he's absolutely right. From a short corner of gold, which they took late last year, when price was at 1,800 and inexplicably started going down, they've now established a long corner in gold, which should give you some idea where price is headed from here.
All right, so let's talk about silver because that's also big in the news, has been for years.
Yeah.
They inherited a huge short position from Bear Stearns when they bought Bear Stearns. I'm talking of JP Morgan. What's the status of that huge short position?
Still there.
Still there?
Really, yeah. They've been able to trim it. They trimmed it considerably over the course of the last 8 months, from something around the neighborhood of maybe 50,000 contracts down to 10. But silver is so tight, and there are so few market participants, they couldn't get entirely out. Unlike gold, where they're able to flip completely from short to long. And we know that by looking at this data that the CFTC generates themselves. They put out these reports. Now, granted, maybe the data's bad, who knows? But we have to go with it, and it is what it is. And everything indicates that everybody is still short silver. Most everybody are still short gold, but JPMorgan is now long gold, and that's the big thing.
All right, let's talk about the Comex for a second, because of course it is a paper market, and there is speculation now that their inventories are running down to near zero.
Yeah.
Same thing with JPMorgan's inventory of gold that they hold, I guess, a custodian for folks.
Yeah.
And is a run on the Comex possible, or will they just settle in paper? And I don't know if you covered the London Bullion Markets Association or not, but there is, right now, according to Andrew McGuire, a run on these precious metals on the London Bullion Markets Association right now. What's up, Turd?
Yeah, no, that's been going on for quite some time. In fact, we've seen that the Comex depositories have lost something like 4 million ounces of gold just this year has flown out of there. Break down all the delivery numbers that come from the CME. Most of it has come out of JPMorgan as they were getting out from under this short position.
This is the short position they inherited, the Bear Stearns.
Well, no, that's on the gold side.
Okay.
The silver side, they're still short. And all the big banks are still short. And that's still going to continue to be a big weight, a big drag on the silver market indefinitely.
Well, let's talk about the precious metals versus the dollar, because, as you know, America's going to war again.
Yep.
And a lot of people say the wars are to bail out folks like JPMorgan, because it gives them a lot of cover to go in there and manipulate markets in a way that's really quite shameless to try to. What would be their move going forward? What's their number one objective, do you think, to restore their balance sheet? Because right now their liabilities are probably triple their balance sheet in terms of their reserves. So what do you think that there would be their next move to try to extricate themselves from a very Enron-like dangerous position at JPMorgan?
That's what's really challenging about the position they're in, Max, because they're so buried in derivatives, especially in the interest rate market. We've seen what has happened to interest rates, heck, just even today.
How exposed are they to rising interest rates? Because the 10-year note is now once again at year highs, 18 months high.
Yeah.
How exposed are they, especially on the credit default swaps, to a rising rate environment, Turd Ferguson?
Well, it's an opaque environment. Who can really say for sure? It certainly looks like they're terribly exposed. And their function as a primary dealer for the Fed and all the stuff that these major banks have done, particularly JPMorgan, to help the Fed keep interest rates low. And look what it's done. Rates have doubled just in the last 6 months. So I think they're all in deep trouble. The dollar is rallying, as you said, but bonds are selling off like crazy.
Right. Now, over in the UK, Mark Carney has taken over from Bank of England. He said, we're going to have forward guidance to keep rates low. Since that day, rates have done nothing but go up. What do you see happening in the UK?
Yeah, it's more of the same. The buyer of last resort is the Bank of England, just like the buyer of last resort is the Fed. This notion that they're going to taper, they might taper a little, just as Bernanke's little going away present. Because I think what Bernanke's going to say is, hey, I put in this program of QE. As I was leaving, I started to taper. It wasn't my fault that it ended up going to infinity. When I left, I had saved the economy and I'd begun to taper QE. This is Summers' problem. This is Yellen's fault, not mine. I'm the hero.
It seems like whenever they do a changing of the guards at the Fed, it's usually when they have some kind of crash. And then they always come in with an emergency, and they declare emergency powers, and then they re-architect the system. Let's talk about Blythe Masters, the Wicked Witch of JPMorgan. She's the architect of the credit default swap market.
Yep.
She's really at the nexus of all the fraudulent activity that Morgan engages with hourly. Some are now speculating they're going to be walking the plank.
Yeah.
Her involvement in energy rigging, energy market rigging. What's the update?
Isn't that remarkable? Congress can investigate baseball. They can investigate Lance Armstrong and all these guys they want to put in jail, but Blythe can lie to Congress in front of a.
Is that what she did?
Yes.
She lied to Congress.
Lied to
Masters?
Congress, exactly.
She just lied, blatant lied.
She might be up there someplace right now. We waved to her.
Having a coup d'etat. I want to talk to you about a very important topic here. We cover it on the show often. I call it price propaganda. Prices are telegraphing certain conditions in the markets. But those prices, or the price discovery mechanism, has for the most part been destroyed through manipulation.
Right.
You can't look at the price anymore and determine really what the underlying economic activity is anymore. What can you look at to really understand what's happening? If you really, I guess you could call this inside baseball. But what do the professionals look at? You guys over at Zero Hedge are always looking at the real picture, not just the superficial picture. When you drill down, where do you look to find out what's really going on beyond just the prices? And what I'm talking about is certain numbers are completely falsified, like CPI, PPI, GDP, the employment numbers. They're all false.
Right.
They're all nonsense.
Right.
The volume, whatever volume on Wall Street, It's completely robots trading with robots. It says nothing. What's really happening in the volume?
Well, just to finish that point, that's what I'm getting at. You have to go off of your own experience and trust your own instincts. If you know that the unemployment rate really isn't 7%, don't believe what the guy
But how would
tells
you know? What do you look at?
I look around my own town. I talk to people that I know. I trust alternative media sources such as yourself rather than watching CNBS.
All right, so
you've
why
got
is
to
it,
trust yourself.
why is it then that people won't believe their own eyes? When they see financial news on CNBC and it's patently false, they're being lied to, they're propagandized, and they know what's happening in their own town, why do they believe Maria Bartiromo instead of believing their own eyes?
I think it's two things. It's cognitive dissonance, first of all, and then it's a basic normalcy bias that people have. They want to believe that everything is fine. It's like the people in the towers downtown 12 years ago. They were told to stay in their offices, even though they could look across and see a building on fire.
I heard at that time that there was a Morgan Stanley broker in the South Tower who stayed behind to trade airline put options, and as a result, didn't escape and died. Did you hear that story?
That wouldn't surprise me, Max. Got his fate, I guess, that was coming to him.
Well, he died with his puts on.
Yeah, he made some money, I guess, for his heirs, perhaps.
Now, finally, let's talk about this post-Lehman collapse reflation era. Because after the Lehman collapse, the central banks got together, they printed trillions of dollars, the balance sheet of the Bank of America, the Federal Reserve Bank expanded by trillions of dollars, same thing Bank of England around the world. Are we at the end now of that reflationary period? Is the housing market rolling over? Is the stock market rolling over? Are we going to go back to this primary bear market that started really in 2000?
Max, I think it's impossible to say. I think we'll only know that we've reached the end after we've reached the end. Because they'll continue to print money. They'll continue to dress up the balance sheets of banks like JPMorgan and Citigroup.
Is JPMorgan solvent?
I don't know. I wish I could tell you for
sure. If you mark to market,
if you did that.
Mark to market the bonds on their books and the assets on their books. If you added them all up based on today's current market price, is the bank solvent?
From what I understand, no. Because FASB went in and changed the rules under political pressure in 2009.
FASB being the
Financial Accounting Standards Board.
Right.
Which allowed banks like JPMorgan to mark to maturity instead. The bonds and the CDOs and things like that from 2007 and 2008 and before are all worth pennies on the dollar. They're never going to be worth more than pennies. If they had to mark them to market every day, they'd be undercapitalized and insolvent.
So if I came to you with a used car that was beaten up and it was in a car crash, and I said, I want you to buy this car for $40,000 because I want you to go into a time machine and base the price on what was happening 10 years ago, that's about the same logic that JPMorgan uses to say that the bonds on our books, even though they're worth pennies on the dollar, if you go into a time machine and look back 10 years, they're actually worth 100 cents on the dollar, therefore they're worth 100 cents on the dollar.
Or if you go forward in that same time machine 20 years, that these are going to mature at par.
All right, Turd, let's, all fanciful thinking aside, let's drill down into the mechanics of Comex. Walk us through the number of contracts, who's short, who's long. I wanted people to understand exactly the gravity and the specifics of the situation.
Okay, this is all data that's supplied by the CFTC, regardless of what we think about them. This is numbers that come from them. There's a report that comes out once a month, usually the first Friday of the month, called the Bank Participation Report. It's a summary of the positions of the 4 largest U.S. banks and the 20 largest non-U.S. banks. They don't give you specifics because that might kind of be too helpful. They want to keep it as opaque as possible. But we're able to decipher that and look at the changes. As recently as May, the 4 U.S. banks were net short gold futures, as they always have been. But by the report in August, they'd gone from 17,000 contracts net short to 60,000 net long. Now we can look at the other banks, but I think the main one, the big kahuna, is these guys right here. They've flipped. They have used, maybe they've even caused, this whole counterintuitive market move from 1,800 back in November down to 1,200 in June. They've utilized that time period, that price weakness, to get out of that short position, flip it to long. They made probably about $2 billion. It's a nice building they have here. Could have paid for it, I guess. And now they've gone to where they're obviously net long by the data. Look, people are trying to say that prices are going lower. Don't believe it. It's already lower than the cost of production for the miners, so then we're going to get into a supply issue. But if JPMorgan is long, the price is going higher. That we can say with certainty.
All right, so as you point out, the price is below the cost of production, and you've got the biggest player in the space now, net long. Yep. And so your thoughts are that the gold market, when it got down to 1,200 or so, kind of like that's the bottom, if you will.
Yeah. The question is, what do they know? Why would they, I guess, diverge from their modus operandi? They've always been short gold. They've always been short silver. All of the bullion banks, short gold, short silver, all of them still are. The only anomaly is JPMorgan being long gold. What do they know? What are they preparing for?
Well, you know, famously during World War II, JPMorgan sided with both the Nazis and the United States.
Yeah.
They played both sides.
Yeah.
Now we're entering onto a war footing again.
Yeah.
They're going long gold. What does this say perhaps about the US dollar? What are your thoughts on the US dollar going forward?
Again, it's the tallest midget currently. You know, they value it by the index, which measured it against all the other fiat currencies. So, you know, it'll probably continue to waffle back and forth just like it has for 5 or 6 years.
All
The
right.
true measure is it versus gold, and that's going to keep declining.
So it'll continue to depreciate against gold.
Absolutely.
All right, Turd Ferguson of TFMetals.com. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Max, my pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Turd Ferguson. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us on Twitter, Keiser Report. Until next time, don't be like Jamie and destroy America's currency by debasing it with money printing. Bye, y'all.